to look at the last section in Chapter 8, Section 4, the development of gender roles and gender differences. How exactly does this happen? Well, we don't know, but let's take a look at some theories and what we do know. Now, the development of gender roles and sex differences may be steeped in just our stereotypes. There are feminine and masculine gender role types. If you look in your book in Table 8.4, you can see some stereotypical masculine and feminine traits. I'm not saying that they're accurate or right, just saying that they exist. For females, things like gentleness, helpfulness, warmth, submissiveness. For men, things like aggressiveness, self-confidence, competence in business, math, and science. All right. We know that by the ages of 3 to around 9 or 10, children become increasingly stereotyped into those traditional roles. For example, traits like cruel and repair broken things are often viewed as masculine, and traits like often is afraid and bakes cookies and or cooks and bakes, are seen as feminine. Now, interestingly, when children are asked about their own sex, they perceive their own sex in a better light than they do the opposite sex. So they often see their gender or their sex as harder working, nicer, less selfish. Now, when we look at gender differences, sex differences or gender differences in infancy are small and inconsistent. We really don't see them. Isn't until we start to get a little bit older, preschool age, that some of those differences start to reveal themselves in the choice of toys and play activities. Boys tend to engage in that more rough and tumble play and are more aggressive, which is stereotypical, and they do show greater visual spatial ability. Girls show greater verbal ability, but they do tend to show also more empathy and report more fear. So these are things that are actually differences that we actually see as boys and girls develop, and changing from that infancy where there doesn't seem to be a big difference into preschool age where there's already a difference showing themselves. Now, there are lots of different theories about why these sex differences exist, and we're going to talk about a number of them. And we're going to start with evolution and heredity. Now, if we look at evolutionary psychology, the idea here is that these different traits and these sex differences have evolved over time via natural selection, because these gender traits, these gender specific traits, aided in the likelihood of our survival. So by women behaving a certain way, being more the homemaker, the caretaker, being affectionate, agreeable, and emotional, and men being the more breadwinner, warrior, aggressive, adventurous. These traits, like your book said, the survival of our ancient ancestors is etched onto our genes. These traits made us more successful, and so we're more likely to pass on the genes for those traits because it has helped us succeed as human beings. All right. We do know that traits include structural differences in gender differences, gender differences that are found in the brain. There are gender differences found in body chemistry, like hormones. This can lead to things like males placing more value on physical attributes and mate selection. That's a stereotypical kind of idea, and also the stereotypical idea of females placing a premium on personal factors such as financial status and reliability. Those are the kinds of things that, according to evolutionary psychologists, those are the expressions of those genes, those old hunter-gatherer, homemaker, caretaker genes expressing themselves in sort of a modern day society. Okay, organization of the brain. Now, if we look at the brain, The brain may be female and male differentiated. That means our brains may work differently depending on if we're male or female. Now they have done studies on rats and human beings, and they've looked at how rats and humans navigate. And what they found in both rats and humans is that our brain works differently depending on whether we're male or female. They found that males, they looked at the hippocampus, because the hippocampus it helps with that navigation. And the hippocampus in both hemispheres, men are using the hippocampus in both hemispheres when they are navigating, when they are getting from point A to point B. Women, females, and female rats, however, use the hippocampus on the right hemisphere only, along with that right prefrontal cortex. So they're not using that left hemisphere hippocampus. So there is actually a brain difference, a wiring difference between males and females, between men and women when they are navigating. So there does seem to be a differentiation in organization of the brain. Okay, sex hormones. All right. One of the theories here is that gender differences in our personalities and our behaviors could be related to prenatal levels of sex hormones, what we're exposed to as fetuses. Now, findings have been mixed in this, but there have been some interesting studies out there. There was a study done by Young, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, Young in 2009, where she looked at girls who had been exposed to higher levels of testosterone during their fetal development, because of some issues going on with their mothers at that time. 212 pregnant women, she looked at their fetuses, and she found that the girls of these mothers at age 8.5 expressed more masculine type play than did the girls of moms who weren't or who didn't have the same kind of prenatal issues, and the girls weren't exposed to those higher levels of testosterone. They've looked at girls and boys and what kind of toys they seem to go for, and a study by Nick Meyer in 2005 and his or her colleagues. I'm not sure if Nick Meyer is a male or female, but Nick Meyer and colleagues found that as early as 13 months, children are displaying preferences for gender type toys. So, girls preferring dolls and boys preferring things like cars and trucks as early as the age of 13. And the idea is that something about the sex hormones, either during prenatal development or after, are causing those gender differences. Okay, social cognitive theory. All right, this is where the behaviors of others start to affect how we react and how we behave. The idea here is that children learn masculine or feminine behavior by observing other people and by imitating the models of the same sex. All right, so if we have a male model and role model and we're male, we're going to observe and emulate what he's doing. If we have a female role model and we're female, we're going to emulate what they're doing. So what's acceptable, what's expected, either of a man or a woman, we get that information from our same-sex role models. And we tend to, as a culture, if girls behave in a way that we think girls should behave, we tend to reward that with compliments, with smiles, with companionship, with respect. And the same with boys. We tend to do the same thing. So we're being rewarded by displaying the right kinds of gender specific behaviors. We do know that boys are often encouraged to roam farther from home, to be more independent than girls. But we do also know, if we look at, there's been some research done by Leaper in 2013 where they looked at primary school children, and primary school children tend to show less of that gender stereotyping if mom is engaged in more masculine household and childcare tasks like washing the car, taking kids to ball games, assembling toys, that sort of thing. And maternal employment also helps to kind of depolarize, if you will, that gender-specific sort of role. So, in the research so far, they've looked at moms, I guess, more primarily, and what mom does and how mom works can have an effect on those gender stereotypes not being so clear cut. All right, cognitive developmental theory. Now, this, excuse me, is taken from the work of Lawrence Kohlberg. Now, you might remember Kohlberg, his work in moral development, and he also looked at gender identity development. And according to this idea, children form concepts about their gender and then fit their behavior to the concept. So they've got the concept in their head, and then they're going to behave in ways that fit that concept. Now, according to Kohlberg, gender typing involves emergence of three concepts. First of all, gender identity happens around 2 years, knowing whether you're male or female, right? At about that age, we can discriminate that. Gender stability, 4 to 5 years. Okay, this is the idea that realizing one's sex is for a lifetime. That unless we take, and 4 and 5 year olds don't understand this, but they get that they were born male or they were born female, and that's how they're going to remain. Now we know there are ways in which we can physically change our gender presentation. But at 4 to 5 years, this is the time we realize that this is sort of a permanent, if you will, thing. And then gender constancy, 5 to 7 years. This is the idea behind, according to Kohlberg, that people's gender doesn't change even if they change or dress their behavior. So a woman who cuts her hair short is still going to be a woman. A man who puts on an apron and cooks is still going to remain a man. All right. Once they've developed that sense of gender stability and constancy, then children are going to seek to behave in ways that are consistent with their gender. So once we've got these three things in place, identity, stability, constancy, Kohlberg says, then we're going to change our behavior to fit our gender, to fit those categories. And if we look at different cultures, this gender typing happens in the same order of stages across lots of different cultures. Lastly, gender schema theory. And this is the idea that children use gender as one way of organizing information about the world. And this, Leeper again was one who looked at this, and also Martin and Rubel. And gender schema is just the idea that we have concepts about being male and female, what it means to be male and female physically, what it means to be psychologically, what it means to be in terms of personality, what it means to be in terms of our behavior. And once we come to understand ourselves as male or female, then we tend to seek out information about what that looks like, traits, behaviors, personality traits, physical traits, and then we seek to live up to that. So gender identity can inspire gender appropriate behavior. Boys and girls seek information that jives with gender that they feel and try to live up to them. So boys are going to show, for instance, better memory for boy toys, activities, occupations. Girls show better memory for feminine toys, activities, and occupations. Now, the thing is, most scholars today would agree that it's not just one or the other. It's not just biology. It's not just social cognition, but it's an interaction of our cognitive thoughts about gender and our biology, how we're wired, that drive us to the gender that we feel that we are. It's, again, as in all other kinds of psychology, there's lots of different ways to look at it, and there's usually not one clear-cut way to think about gender identity and the development of gender roles and gender differences. There's a lot going on there. All right, that's the end of Chapter 8. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking with you later on about Chapter 9.